Strange as it may sound, a hidden network of rundown refineries deep in Colombia's jungles has been quietly fueling the global cocaine trade for years. Everything about these operations screams danger. Dozens of makeshift labs siphoning crude oil from exposed pipelines, lurking in remote areas where police only venture with heavy backup. But what's even more unbelievable is how a few stolen barrels of crude, boiled down to cheap gasoline, can spark a chain reaction that spreads illegal drugs around the world. It all starts with crude oil pipelines that run through miles of rugged terrain. Most people think of pipeline theft in terms of quick break-ins or small-time sabotage, but the truth is far more systematic. Thieves have learned to locate weak points, carefully drilling tiny holes to insert hoses or valves. In some stretches, these pipes sit above ground and are as easy to breach as an old garden hose. The stolen oil is transported just a few yards into the forest, where tar-black pools collect gallons of liquid gold. Locals refer to these hidden pools with nicknames, sometimes calling the siphoned gasoline patigrillo, a term that sounds almost harmless until you see firsthand how toxic it is. The entire process poisons the land from day one, yet every barrel they refine means easy money for people with few other options. Dressed in camouflage and armed to the teeth, special police teams regularly sweep into these dense jungles on foot. Helicopters can't always land in thick canopies, and the police have no choice but to trudge through mud, brush away thick foliage, and follow the pungent smell of fuel. Many times, the criminals are long gone, having vanished into the undergrowth moments before the raid. Word travels fast in these isolated villages. Someone spots the incoming patrols, and text messages or whispered warnings ripple through the area. By the time the police find the illegal lab, it's deserted, but still reeking of fresh diesel fumes. These raids are never without risk. Armed lookouts and allied gangs patrol the same muddy paths, ready to take a shot at government forces or booby-trap the refineries with explosive devices. Even if no armed conflict erupts, the toxins left behind by the refining process can be as dangerous as bullets. Pools of half-processed oil sit in the open, trees are coated in tar, and the smell of burned chemicals lingers in the humid air. To dismantle a single lab, the police often resort to blowing it up on the spot. They pack charges around the metal barrels and hoses, set off a controlled explosion, and watch the resulting fireball destroy the makeshift facility in minutes. Clouds of black smoke choke the skies for hours, raining down soot and chemical residues that embed themselves into the soil and nearby rivers. It's a necessary evil, authorities say, because flying the oil out is impossible on this terrain, but the environmental cost is staggering. Yet the grim reality is that many locals willingly take these jobs because they see no better way to survive. Ask them why, and they'll tell you it's not about wanting to break the law. It's about putting food on the table and paying rent. A single worker might earn 3 or 4 times more by refining crude oil than they would in a low-paying formal job, if they can even find one. But accidents are horrifyingly frequent. One man recalls how he was burned in a flash fire when a vat of crude overheated and exploded. He spent months in a coma, enduring painful skin grafts and surgeries. His scars still show, and the memory of the smell of burning fuel clings to him wherever he goes. He can't forget those days when he stood next to that crude oil pit, inhaling toxic fumes for long shifts under the hot sun, because that's how he could afford basic necessities. This gas they produce, a cheap, low-quality fuel, feeds an even bigger machine: Colombia's notorious cocaine empire. Anyone who's familiar with the war on drugs knows that Colombian cartels are always innovating. They look for more cost-effective ways to produce the raw paste that eventually becomes white powder. What better method than using the cheapest source of gasoline available? After all, it's not exactly easy to buy bulk quantities of legal fuel when your goal is to mix it with coca leaves and turn it into a product that's smuggled across borders. In these hidden labs, workers stir shredded coca leaves in big drums brimming with chemicals. They add water, alkaline substances, and, most importantly, that low-grade gasoline. All these ingredients get churned until a sticky, off-white paste emerges. This paste is sold to middlemen who refine it further into the more potent form, fetching sky-high prices in markets thousands of miles away. Even though the Colombian government has been fighting the war on drugs for decades, since long before Pablo Escobar rose to notoriety, the business keeps evolving. Every year, the authorities destroy thousands of coca labs, making big news headlines and political talking points. But less attention is paid to the illegal oil refining that makes those labs possible. Government forces have begun to wise up. Targeting these crude refineries is another way to attack the cocaine supply chain at its root. Yet for every lab destroyed, another seems to pop up overnight in a neighboring patch of forest. Environmental activists in Colombia are sounding the alarm. When these refineries burn, they release toxic fumes that kill small forest creatures and saturate the ground with harmful residues. The once lush vegetation slowly fades, leaving patches of barren land coated in oily sludge. Local communities downstream complain of sick livestock, fish dying in the rivers, and kids developing unexplained rashes. Some scientists warn that these harmful chemicals can remain in the soil for years, leaching into drinking water and crippling local ecosystems. At the heart of this cycle are also families who farm coca leaves in remote areas. Their story is one of constant struggle. Legal crops like plantains, cocoa, or coffee may not pay enough to escape poverty, especially in regions lacking infrastructure. Many of these areas are so isolated that roads are in disrepair, and any harvest of a legal crop can spoil before it even reaches distant markets. Incentives offered by the government to switch from coca to other crops often fail to materialize. Promises of economic support and subsidies arrive late, or sometimes not at all. This leaves coca as the only truly profitable option, even though it keeps farmers locked in a dangerous relationship with cartels and paramilitary groups. From a distance, it's easy to ask, why not plant something legal? But step into these rural communities and you'll see roads riddled with potholes, no reliable access to electricity, and minimal healthcare. Coca, on the other hand, promises multiple harvests per year, and there's almost always a buyer willing to show up with cash in hand. Some farmers mention half-hearted attempts to grow bananas or coffee, but they can't compete with the immediate returns of coca leaf sales. They share stories of entire families living off these fields, sometimes for generations, passing down knowledge of how to cultivate, harvest, and process the leaves into something that buyers will pay for on the spot. It's not just the farmers who are caught in the crossfire. Gangs and criminal factions constantly battle for territory, especially near the pipeline routes. Kidnappings, extortion, and turf wars escalate. Gunshots in the night are not uncommon, and local residents learn to go indoors before sundown to avoid trouble. Law enforcement pushes deeper into cartel strongholds with each new operation. Some factions retaliate by sabotaging roads and threatening community leaders who dare speak up about the pollution or violence. On the policy side, Colombia's current government ignited fresh controversies by floating the idea of legalizing cocaine. The president argues that decades of a hardline drug war approach have done little to curb production or trafficking, but have left the countryside battered by violence and contamination. Critics claim such a move would devastate foreign relations, especially with the United States, Colombia's largest ally and financial backer in the war on drugs. Others suggest that partial legalization, coupled with strict regulations and economic aid to farmers, might break the grip of cartels and reduce the environmental toll. But no one is sure how the international community would react, and many fear that if one door closes, criminals will just look for another route or substance to exploit. Meanwhile, U.S. involvement remains substantial. Washington has poured billions of dollars into anti-narcotics operations, equipping Colombian forces and guiding policies aimed at eradicating both coca fields and the labs that refine it. That partnership has led to sweeping raids, targeted assassinations of cartel leaders, and the seizure of record amounts of cocaine. Yet for every victory claimed, the underlying problems remain. Desperate communities still rely on black market economies, and sophisticated criminal groups adapt faster than the government can respond. If you talk to Colombian police commanders, they'll tell you that destroying these oil refineries is a necessary puzzle piece, one that can slow down the cocaine supply at a critical step. But the cat-and-mouse game is endless. In a typical mission, officials might blow up a few dozen refineries, watch the fires burn for hours, then come back weeks later to find newly built labs in the same general location. Some suspects face arrest, but the top-tier organizers remain elusive. It's often an endless loop. Locals get lured in by high payoffs, criminal networks handle logistics and intimidation, and the jungle pays the highest price of all. A few environmentalists have called for safer cleanup methods instead of resorting to large-scale explosions. They argue that burning the leftover oil only deepens the contamination and releases massive amounts of noxious chemicals into the air. However, transporting that sludge out of the jungle is complicated by rough terrain, and the government doesn't seem to have the budget or the infrastructure to do it on a large scale. Patrol commanders say they'd prefer not to blow anything up, but if they don't, the labs remain operational, and workers return as soon as the coast is clear. This vicious cycle extends to the families of those who risk working in these hidden operations. Many come from small villages with no reliable income stream. They know it's a gamble every time they fire up the makeshift distilleries and heat the crude in giant metal drums, but there's quick cash to be made. Some see it as a temporary fix, earn enough money to move away and start fresh. But moving away costs more than most realize, and injuries incurred on the job can be devastating. The labs usually have no safety gear, flammable fumes swirl around open flames, and one slip-up is enough to set a place ablaze. Worse yet, there's no system to cover medical bills. If you're hurt, you're on your own. The people who buy the final product, cocaine, likely have no idea just how tangled this story is. By the time that white powder reaches nightclubs or street corners in major cities across the globe, it's already left behind a trail of deforestation, polluted waterways, and shattered lives. Farmers, refiners, traffickers, corrupt officials, and international enforcers all become part of an endless tug-of-war. And it's one in which everyone claims to be fighting for survival, whether that survival is economic, political, or social. Yet talk of reform persists in hushed circles. Some politicians argue that pushing coca farmers toward legitimate crops only works if those crops can actually be sold at profitable rates, which requires major investments in roads, schools, and local markets. Otherwise, farmers will return to what they know best: coca. Others question whether the entire approach to the war on drugs needs an overhaul, focusing on treatment and education rather than purely militarized crackdowns. But it's easier said than done. The moment officials let up on enforcement, critics accuse them of enabling criminal empires. Despite the long history of conflict, it doesn't seem like there's a quick resolution in sight. Police squads still get their orders every week, heading out before dawn to search for new wells of stolen oil, new camouflage tents, and new networks of hoses snaking from the pipeline into a jungle clearing. Occasionally, they'll stumble on hidden camps used by heavily armed groups, forced to engage in firefights to protect themselves. Other times, local families watch from a distance, hoping they won't be singled out as conspirators simply because they live nearby. As soon as the police detonate the site, massive flames leap into the sky. The ground shakes and the smell is overwhelming. You might see thick black plumes visible for miles. It's a sight that's repeated countless times across different regions of Colombia. And each time, officers stand in the scorching heat, wondering if it will make any difference in the grand scheme. Even those who have served in specialized units for years admit privately that they feel stuck in a cycle. They might drag out giant hoses, hack away at wooden scaffolding, toss gasoline drums onto blazing fires, but the root causes remain. Locals will keep tapping that pipeline as long as there's a market for cheap fuel, and the cartels will continue to pay top dollar for that fuel if it helps them churn out more product. The war on drugs has shifted shapes over the decades, but it hasn't gone away. It's always adapting, always finding the next vulnerable spot to exploit. In the end, no single crackdown operation, no matter how forceful, can fix a problem driven by global demand, local poverty, and an entire shadow economy. For each destroyed refinery, another blueprint exists, ready to be set up in the jungle as soon as the authorities leave. Some say a more radical solution, like full legalization of certain substances, could undermine cartels and remove the incentive for such destructive operations. Others insist that strategy would invite chaos, leading to a spike in usage and fueling new criminal avenues. Each viewpoint has backing from economists, activists, and foreign governments, but none can guarantee a clean, immediate fix. Standing in front of a smoking, half-flooded crater where a refinery once stood, it's hard to avoid the feeling that this is only one battle in a much larger war. The same war that saw Pablo Escobar's rise and fall, that has claimed countless lives, and that continues to spread far beyond Colombia's borders. Yet there's a glimmer of hope whenever a community leader finds a way to bring legal development projects into isolated villages, or when a small group of farmers successfully transitions to legal crops and sees a real profit. If scaled up, those successes might chip away at the labyrinth of criminal enterprises. For now, the problem keeps cycling. Stolen crude oil refined into cheap gasoline, used to process coca leaves into a drug that's smuggled across oceans. Scorched jungles and battered communities remain the collateral damage. Police keep risking their lives to disrupt an underground network so vast it sometimes feels endless. Politicians debate sweeping solutions that could bring big changes or spark big controversies. And the ordinary people at the center of it all, scraping by to feed their families, are left wondering if tomorrow will bring something different or just more of the same. In that uncertainty, you find both the tragedy and the fate possibility that one day, the chain of events ignited by a stolen barrel of crude oil might finally run out of fuel.